All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we want to talk about the difference between self-sufficiency and self-reliance and using a protracted power outage as the case study. So sit back, let's grab yourself your favorite beverage, and we are going to get into it. All right, thank you very much for joining us again. Listen, this week is really important. We want to focus on, if you have followed this podcast for a significant period of time or any period of time, or you've read the Substack, or you've gone through our recent Roadmap to Resilience, which is a 5-part free series that we have here on the podcast. We have it here nestled on YouTube in a playlist, and we have it over on Substack in the written form. It's our free offering to the world. If you're going to sit down and map out your road from where you are today to a prepared life, the roadmap to resilience is what you need to follow to get there. It's free of charge. It's available on preparednesslabs.ca. The links are all there. Go there and get your free information. Beyond that, we look at your trifecta of preparedness plans. And if you think about the totality of bad days that could happen to you, the hazards, the pitfalls, disasters, and emergencies, and you can think of any number of hazards, uncertainty, and chaos, and climatic events that you are or potentially exposed to, and you could come up with dozens of hazard plans. Now, the research that we've done here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, and that I've done through other theoretical engagements, has shown that it's clear about 3 plans is the maximum that a single unit of measure is going to be capable of maintaining, keeping up to date, keeping socialized, and keeping people interested in being part of it. Now, when I say unit of measure, I mean we can talk about a family, we can talk about an individual, we can talk about a small business, we can talk about a large business, we can talk about a neighborhood or a community. 3 plans is the ideal number. Above 3, you start to see a sliding scale of disengagement. It gets to a period of apathy. If I was to say to you, hey, listen, I think you should have an evacuation plan, if I think you should have a wildfire plan, I think you should have a flood plan, your tornado plan, your power outage plan, the loss of cellular coverage plan, loss of bigger communication plan. We could go on and on about all the pieces of critical infrastructure that could fail and all the hazards that could fail, that could cause them to fail. And you could have a plethora of plans. People don't pay any attention. It becomes an insurmountable number of asks that we're presenting to the population, and the population shuts off. Because remember, what the population is seeking is a dream outcome with a high degree perceived of likelihood. So the first part of any information that you're passing off on preparedness is you have to present what the world looks like when you success, and you have to demonstrate that there is very little effort required. That's the top part of the equation. The bottom part of the equation is that we try to minimize as much as possible is the amount of time it's going to take for this to occur and the perceived effort and sacrifice that the individual has to make. And this is a clear mathematical calculation that exists in determining whether your preparedness messaging is going to be successful. So you need to have a very small number. So we found 3, and when we looked at the totality of events that could happen in emergency preparedness, we looked at the idea of, at one end of the spectrum, you have the most likely, but the least dangerous. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the least likely and the most dangerous event. And if I can get a unit of measure, a community, an individual, family, whatever it may be, to be prepared to manage both those extremes, then by definition, they're ready to handle whatever might befall in the middle. So from a spectrum of preparedness, there's only really 2 things. Now, the most likely and least impactful one is what we're using as our frame of our case study today, which is a prolonged power outage. I don't mean the bumps in the nights that last a couple of hours. They're inconvenient. They make you shut off your video game. You might have to find an alternate way to put your favorite sports program on. But overall, they're just an inconvenience and not a big deal. I'm talking about the 3 to 7 to 14 day prolonged power outages that are likely caused by some total network failure, like we had the brownout in 2003, for those of you in northeastern United States and in Ontario and parts of Quebec that remember that one. Or you're going to have some type of tornado that goes through a significant part of the power distribution network. You're going to have an ice storm like we had in 1999. 98, 99 here in Canada and some parts of the U.S. There's some event that's going to cause a pause in the delivery of power to your house. So what does that look like for you? And the question that we often ask people to just sit back and think for a second, what does your world look like when the power goes out and stays out? And pick an extreme number. I go for 14 days. Let's sit back, sit around your kitchen table with your family, sit around your boardroom table with your work employees, and talk through what does our world look like when the power is no longer available to us. And again, we don't care about the cause. The cause is irrelevant. If you go down the pole of trying to figure out different plans for every reason the power goes out, it's just ridiculous. You can just be down the rabbit hole forever. The key to success is when you look at the loss of power as a failure of critical infrastructure. And so now what you're concerned with is, what does my world look like? And how do I continue to conduct activities as if the power was on, but without the power? Because remember, the purpose of preparedness is to be able to replicate all your current daily life, irrespective of the loss of access to critical infrastructure. So when the power goes down, you want to get as close to that level of normacy, of normal operations in your family and your business life as you can without having access to power. Now, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. We have a very simplistic plan, and it's based upon you and your organization, your unit of measure, whether you're talking about your small business or your family, to sit back and think about, what is my minimum power profile? What is the minimum amount of energy that I need, measured in watts or amps, depending on how you want to run the electrical equation, in my household to keep the minimal acceptable standard of power ongoing? Now, all of us will want to say, I want to keep every light on. I want to keep everything going. I want everything to be working as per normal. The reality is what do you need run? Now, filming this on a smartphone, it's obviously going to be the smartphone. This is the one device, and I have my old Apple one here, iPhone SE. On this device here is my connectivity to the knowledge of man. I can run my entire small business off of this. I can teach entire university courses off of this. And I can conduct almost every possible thing that I need to do other than basic human requirements of food, water, and shelter, I can do with this device. So logically speaking, this is your start point. You're going to have to keep this going. Now, my preference is to use small battery banks, right? This is a battery bank that has a solar device on it, so it has the ability to recharge in sunlight based upon what, cloudy days, whatever days. And I'm able to plug it into the smartphone and recharge as necessary. Now, that's obviously going to be different for each individual, how often you need to access the smartphone, how much you need, how many smartphones, because remember, most of us live in a family of several people, and each one of these people are going to want their smartphone to be up and running 24/7, considering the amount of time we use them. The reality is figuring out your power profile. How many amps or watts do you need to keep it running? Now, there's lots of considerations when we think about medical devices. There are a number of family members out there who might have CPAP machines or who might have climate-controlled medications. So they need to be kept within a certain temperature range to be safe and helpful and useful. And so you'll have very differing circumstances across many variables. You may have elderly people, elderly members of your family living in care homes, of which you have to consider as part of your preparedness plan. The result is you'll figure out what is that minimum power profile that I need to have. Your next question you have to ask is, how do I provide that. Now, your options are generation. That's it. Generation and storage. Now, this is a solar generator, so it's a generator. It generates power from the sun. Now, you might have a Jackery storage device, as I do. This is a 500-watt Jackery device. It holds about 4 amps at 120 volt. And basically, this is what I determined to be the minimal viable standard required in my household. I can live off this for just the smartphone, but because I have one additional requirement for extra amount of juice, shall we call it, I purchased this Jackery system, which is not the perfect solution, but it was the best system when I bought it out, a couple of years ago. The point being is this will provide me 500 watts of energy. I have a 100-watt solar panel that I can put outside and hook up to this. So in concept, and I know this is not a perfect solution, but in concept, using this solar generation and battery storage model, I can create energy in perpetuity. So as long as my minimum power profile standards don't change, then this device and a 100-watt folding solar panel allows me to go 14, 21, 30, 60, 90, 120 days without power, and I will meet all of my requirements. Your requirements are going to be different. Think about, for one point, I lived in a rural part of Canada, and I was on a septic and well water. I was not aware, believe it or not, at the time. I grew up in a city. I was not aware that your well needed a pump to get the water up, and as soon as the power went out, you didn't have access to water. I found that out the first time the power went out, and I didn't have a backup system. Luckily, it was a very short period of time. The power came back on within a couple of hours, and I realized, okay, I have to figure this out. I developed a solution after that where I had a battery storage, like a couple of car batteries. I don't know how to do this, so I got a friend to wire them up and to hook it up to a part of the panel that I'd be able to switch to when the power went out. I could power my water pump, and that was it, from the batteries on the floor, with an estimated time of, a couple of days before that would run out. I'm not an electrician. I don't know the wizardry that was done, but it was done to the point where we were able to do that. The benefit of that is that I could provide fresh potable water. When you're in the municipality, obviously that's provided by the pressure in the pipes and the government having appropriate backup power systems for the water supply system. So when you're thinking about your minimum power profile and you're thinking about generation, another option you can consider is fossil fuels. So think about propane or gas generators. The difficulty with them is if you're just powering devices off of them, you have to think about how long I need to run it, what is the number of liters that is going to consume per day, multiplied by 14 days, and I have to store this because I don't know when the power outage will occur, and knowing that power is required to get the gasoline out of the ground at the pump at the gas station, I can't wait to fill up my jerry cans till when the disaster happens or when the power outage goes. So I have to store this at home. I caution people at that because storing extra propane and storing, 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 liters of gasoline on a just-in-case basis might seem like a logical thing, but gasoline has to be conditioned, it has to be rotated. Sure, you can use it in your car, etc. There are ways to do it. Think about those options. And a lot of times what you'll find is you really don't need that much energy. You can live with a lot less than you think. And that there was a great story that I read. It happened in Hurricane Fiona that hit in Nova Scotia and PEI, the eastern part of Canada. And there's one group of families where they were closer to the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. They didn't have a lot of money, but they knew that power outages periodically happen in rural Nova Scotia. And so they all went in on a cheap $300 Costco generator. 4 families, they split the cost. They split the cost of the gas, and basically it had wheels on it. They moved it to each house, so each house got 4 or 5 hours a day to run things off power, to ensure the freezer stays frozen, to ensure that your stuff is generated, etc. And then they would wheel it to the next house, and they just kept going around, and power was out for something like 11 or 12 days, and they were just about out of gas when they got to the end. They realized they wouldn't have made the full 14 days, but they realized that not every single household had to have a generator. They had to have access to power generation capability. And so they realized that I don't have a lot of money. Over a year, I could create some system to do that. Another example is a local community wanted backup power generation for their volunteer fire hall. So what they did is they started a 50-50 a charity. So basically sold tickets on 50-50, but and they raised about $3,000, and somebody won the $1,500, and the $1,500 went towards a fairly robust generator system and battery bank that allowed members of the community to come charge devices at the power hall anytime throughout a disaster so that they would have access to energy. So these are the type of things that you can consider. Remember, it's about understanding your minimum power profile and the amount of energy you're going to need. And it's about understanding the varying different ways that you can generate and store power for your usage. Now, self-reliance versus self-sufficiency. Self-reliance is by definition your ability to count on your own knowledge and skills to be able to solve a problem set that you're offered. So whatever problem that you're in, self-reliant individuals are able to either have the skill set or they have the ability to go find the skill set, to learn the skill set. Self-reliant individuals are people who, have never laid a hardwood floor before. It's time to lay a hardwood floor. They go learn how to lay a hardwood floor, right? So self-reliant individuals are people who have a higher degree of self-confidence in their ability to retain skills and to learn new skills. That's self-reliance. Through education, through experience, through exchange of ideas with your social network, you increase your ability to manage and handle events that may happen. That is self-reliance. Self-sufficiency, though, is that you can provide for your animalistic requirements without external assistance. So your animalistic requirements in general are your food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security, right? And there's subheadings in each of those. Drop over to our website at preparednesslabs.ca. There's my book there, book 1, Preparedness Simplified, that has all of this laid out in detail. We've got it on a number of podcast episodes that we talk about each of the individual animalistic requirements. But self-sufficiency means you're able to provide what is required to the human animal and those for whom you're responsible. So if you have a self-sufficient family and a self-sufficient community, a self-sufficient neighborhood, you see the unit of measure can change, but the idea is the constituent neighborhood has the ability to provide for the neighborhood's needs without needing external assistance. Many methodologies, many ways to do that, but self-reliance and self-sufficiency are not the same thing. Often your self-reliance leads to you becoming self-sufficient, but you can be self-sufficient without having a strong sense of self-confidence and self-reliance. The reason that's important is they're often used interchangeably in the prepper and the preparedness and the online risk and resilience community. What we want to concentrate on is that you understand that if you want to become self-reliant, you are focusing on you, your core skill sets, your knowledge, and most importantly, your willingness to learn. Your willingness to listen to people who know about the skills you're seeking, who have access to the knowledge that you want, and have access to methodologies that would improve your current situation and whatever it is that you might be facing. That is the benefit of self-reliance. If you want to become self-sufficient, that's when we look at the words of a prepper. Now, if you follow this podcast for a long enough time, you know that I have delineated, based upon my well over a dozen years of research into the field of individual preparedness, that there are 5 types of prepared people in the world. First, you have the blissfully unaware. That's the individual who just couldn't give two you-know-what about the world around them. They just pound through the day. It is what it is. Whatever happens, happens. And they'll just figure it out, or they won't. They really don't care. The second part is your government-dependent 72-hour folks. These are the people that have drank the Kool-Aid and believe that if they're ready for 72 hours of the big bad day, that at the end of that 72 hours, either the situation will be fixed or the wonderful benevolent government will come along and rescue them, take care of them, coddle them, and keep them safe. The third type is what we refer to as a prepared individual, which has always been the goal of this podcast and all of my research, is to teach people to become a prepared individual, somebody who is capable of taking care, providing their animalistic requirements for themselves, for whom they're responsible, for a period of up to 14 days. And you ask, why do I say 14 days? Well, based upon research that we've done here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated and published in our Journal of Preparedness in Canada that's available on the website free of charge, we've determined that 94% of critical infrastructure failures in North America are restored within 14 days. So if you think of society as functioning because we have access to the sectors of critical infrastructure, in Canada there's 10, in the US there's 16, they encompass the same thing, from medical to food to transportation to government to financial services to water to hospitalization to security to safety, etc., to manufacturing. When they go down, just like we're talking about today with the power going down, hot power is one piece of critical infrastructure. So in 94% of the cases in North America, all of the critical infrastructure is resurrected back to the state of normalcy within 14 days. So if you bet on 14 days, you're going to be right 94% of the time. The fourth type is called a prepper. Now, we define preppers based upon research and evidence, not what people believe or what people think, as individuals who have the ability to replicate those fallen pieces of critical infrastructure for more than 14 days. And for a medium term, which when I mean medium term, I'm out up to 6 months, which means they have the ability to generate power, not just for 14 days, but for an extended period of time. So unless they're using solar, they have very large underground tanks of gasoline or diesel or propane to power generation. They have the ability to replicate food, water, healthcare, transportation systems, all of these pieces of critical infrastructure. They've decided, for a lot of their own reasons, that they have the ability to replicate those in the long run. The other thing that a prepper does, or in general, a belief of a prepper, is that they believe there is a likelihood of significant sectoral collapse in infrastructure in their nation, but that eventually it will resurrect itself. So the prepper believes that there's a likelihood that we have a cascading effect of loss of access to critical infrastructure for an extended period of time that may go out months, but that at some time in the future, it will resurrect itself and it'll return to some port of normalcy. Hence, they make the decision to look far beyond the 14 days, and they look to be able to replicate, not just replace, but replicate. Replicate simply means continuous versus replace, which is a short term. That's what preppers do. The fifth one is your survivalist. The only difference between a survivalist and a prepper is that belief metric of they believe that there's going to be a societal collapse of critical infrastructure and government operations, and that it's not going to be replicated. That when the system goes down, it will go down and stay down, those sectors of critical infrastructure are done for good, and then humanity will return to some part of community or tribal organization, and government will not be a presence in our lives. So a survivalist looks to replicate, not because for a period of time because they think society is going to resurrect itself, but that it's going to collapse. So if you look from the blissfully unaware, the government dependent, the prepared individual, the prepper, and survivalist, you'll see the 5 cascading types of individuals in the preparedness world. When you think about self-reliance and when you think about self-sufficiency, think about where you sit on that. And there are one question that I want you to ask yourself very, very carefully. How confident are you, based upon your current knowledge and skills, that you would have the ability to provide animalistic requirements of food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security to you and your family for a period of 14 days? Right now, how confident are you that you could do that without any external interventions? And the question, we do this in surveys on a regular basis. We have another survey coming out that we're launching in July of 2025 here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. And the survey is going to be of the North American population. We're going to be asking the question, if I shut off all of your access to utilities today, so water, sewer, power, gasoline, propane, whatever it is, it's all shut off. You can't access it. How long are you able to provide for your family's needs in your residence based upon what you have right now before you have to go out into the driveway and put your hand up and ask for assistance? And we ask questions like, none, 0, you can't do anything, 3 days, 14 days, 6 months, or longer than 6 months. And what we're trying to understand is the level of preparedness. And then we ask questions about self-reliance and self-sufficiency to determine where those standards are. And then we talk about your connection to your community, the strength of your social capital, whether you trust people around you, whether you believe, whether you turn to your community, to your faith community, to your friends or family in times of crisis to seek information. Do you look to legacy standard media outlets? Do you look to independent media? Do you look at a Facebook group? Where do you look to find information when the bad day happens or there's a threat of a bad day happening? And the last part that we're very much interested in related to self-reliance and self-sufficiency is, who do you trust to provide accurate and truthful communications in times of a crisis? Is it your local government? Is it your state or provincial government? Is it your national government? Who do you believe is telling you the truth? And who do you believe is telling you the fulsome degree of the information that they have access with? And we're trying to understand levels of trust in government because we think that influences people's decision to adopt extra preparedness methods because their confidence in the ability of the government to react is a lot lower. So really, what we want you to think about in an extended power outage is, what does your world look like when the power goes out? What does your family need in a minimum power profile to be able to do the things that they need to do? And another point, and we'll close on this, is your business. And this is something that often is not done, and it's not talked about in business. We talk about preparedness periodically in our families. We'll talk about after events with maybe our neighbors and our small social group. But how many businesses have an active conversation with their employees about what they intend to do when there is a disaster at the business? So if the power goes out and the power's down for 14 days and you work as an automotive mechanic, does that mean you're about to lose 2 weeks of wages? Is your company going to pay you when the office is shut down because of lack of access to power? Because I'll be honest with you, welcome to today's economic environment. You look at most people, if I was to take away 2 weeks' wages on a moment's notice, that would cause significant hardships for a great number of people. So think about this also, not just your power profile, but what would your financial system look like if, because the power was out, you couldn't earn wages for 2 weeks? How would your family navigate that? How would you navigate that paying bills? Would that cause a problem for you? It's going to be different at each individual level, but having this conversation with your employer, having a conversation about preparedness, about what does your employer intend to do when the bad day or if the bad day happens, based upon what you think is likely to happen. So if the business has to close for whatever reason for short term, do they intend to pay? And you can only have to look as far as the pandemic to understand this. Quite a number of businesses were shut down by government regulations or other circumstances during the pandemic. A few of them continued to pay their employees their regular salary throughout, but the majority simply laid off their employees because there was no revenue coming into the business and waited for the business to be reopened to rehire their employees. Well, if you know that ahead of time, would that influence your preparedness decisions, your savings decisions, an emergency fund decision, knowing that your employer's intent is to not pay you when the business shuts down due to a 2-week power outage? And so therefore, hey, listen, the probability of this is not zero, right? It may be close to zero or it may not, depending on where you live. So let's think about what would this look like for my family and how would I figure it out? The end result of all of this, when you're thinking about extended power outages, is to ask that question, what does my world look like? And to sit back and have that discussion with all of your immediate family and figure out, what does your world look like? How do you get it as close to normalcy as possible? How much power do you really need to generate? How much battery storage capability do you need? And do the math. And it's basic math. You can look online for help to try to figure that out, to add up the amperages or the wattage that you'll need access to. The point being is you're arming yourself and you're arming your family with the information you need to be able to take care of your family when the bad day happens. Trying to figure that out after the lights go out. Trying to figure out, because you can't buy anything because the stores aren't selling anything when the power goes out. When the point of sale systems goes down, when access to internet is cut, no business that we run right now can figure it out. Imagine if we just looked at this one case in a small town where the cellular signal went down and they only had one grocery store, and the grocery store used that scanner, barcode scanner, right, for all of the pricing. Well, guess what? The point of sale system, without access to the internet where the servers were that held all that barcode information, because it wasn't locally held, it was on a server, they couldn't price anything. So they didn't matter if everybody had cash. They had no way of collecting the prices for everything and then collecting it on a piece of paper and billing people. The store simply had to close, and these people had to drive something like 120 miles away to the closest grocery store simply because of a cell phone outage took down their access to their servers that stored the barcode price data, right? So there's a lot of things that can go wrong in a power outage. So it's simply not pausing and going, yeah, whatever, no big deal. I'll just, light some candles and we'll play some board games. That's great. Absolutely great. Have you tried to feed your family non-perishable food for more than 3 days? Have you tried that? What does that look like in your world? How is your wife going to be when you hand her a set of granola bars for the 3rd day in a row? What does that world look like? I'll tell you what it looks like. It is a poop show. Full stop. My success here in my family is measured as to whether I can make my wife a hot cup of tea 24/7, irrespective of where we are. Whether we're driving down the road or whether we're stuck in a snowstorm on the side of a highway or we're in a power outage, I have to be able to make a hot cup of tea. How are you going to make dinner with the power's out? If you have an electric stove, how are you going to make dinner? How are you going to feed everybody? How are you going to boil water for coffee? You ever try cold coffee? Not that delicious. When you start to think about those things in the power outage, you start to think about all the activities that you do that require power. You start to realize there is a whole series of other considerations beyond the simple smartphone that you need to be concerned with when it goes. And I'll offer you this one last tidbit. Please don't be the individual who goes out into their driveway and starts up their car to power their cell phone. Your car is using gasoline. Gasoline is a finite fuel, and cannot be refilled with the power outage because they can't get it out of the ground. Yeah, there might be one station in your neighborhood that has a generator. Good luck trying to get in line for that. So you're in the driveway consuming a finite asset to power another finite asset. It is illogical, and please don't be that person. So thanks again for joining us this week at Inside My Canoe Head. Drop over to our website at www.preparednesslabs.ca or www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Have a look at all that we have to offer. Like, subscribe on the YouTube channel. And if you like what we do, there's a little support the show button there. You go there, it takes you to buy me a coffee. I love black coffee. As a good outdoorsman, I am totally fueled on a great cup of black coffee. So thank you very much for joining this week. Take care. Stay safe.